The world was frozen. Ice spread across the land like a living thing, crawling down from the mountains, swallowing valleys, forests, and rivers beneath its pale weight. The sky hung low and heavy, tinted with the color of ash and steel. Winds howled across endless plains of snow, scouring the earth with invisible claws. The Ice Age was not merely a season. It was an era, a breath of nature that lasted for thousands of years. And somewhere within that great silence, a small group of humans clung to life. They were not kings of their world. They were its survivors, fragile, shivering, and painfully aware that every breath they took was borrowed from a merciless environment. The sun, when it rose, gave no warmth. The nights lasted longer than memory, and the cold was not just around them. It seeped into bone, into thought, into the very rhythm of existence. Each day was a battle against extinction, and yet they endured. Imagine them moving across a field of white, footprints swallowed almost as soon as they were made. Animal hides clung to their bodies, stiff with frost, while smoke drifted from a distant fire behind them, a fire they could never let die. In this world, warmth was more precious than food, more vital than water. To lose the flame was to surrender to the cold, and the cold never forgave. The humans of this age lived small, close, and quiet. Their shelters were humble, shallow caves, hollows in the earth, or rough tents of bone and hide lashed together with sinew. Inside, they huddled in circles, pressed close to share heat, while the fire's light trembled against the stone walls like the heartbeat of the tribe. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, they whispered, breathed, and hoped. The sound of the Ice Age were minimal yet immense. The groan of glaciers shifting like sleeping giants. The distant echo of a mammoth's call fading into the wind. The crack of frozen trees snapping under invisible weight. Against this symphony of cold, human voices were rare, fragile sparks in an ocean of silence. Every word, every laugh, every cry of a child was a defiance of the void. The animals that roamed this land were massive, armored in fur and fat. Woolly mammoths, cave bears, and saber-toothed cats ruled the tundra. For humans, they were both a source of life and a constant threat. To kill one meant food, warmth, and tools for months. To fail meant hunger and death. The world was balanced on a knife's edge. Humans stood not at the top of nature's chain, but clinging to the side of it. Yet even in this frozen hell, there was beauty. The ice caught the sunlight and shattered it into 1,000 shades of blue. The aurora danced across the night sky, painting green fire over a silent world. And when the storm cleared, the horizon stretched forever, pure, untouched, and hauntingly still. In moments like these, one could almost believe that the world was waiting for something for them. This was the crucible in which humanity was forged. Every trial, every frozen dawn shaped their minds and spirits. Around their small fires, they learned to dream. They learned to share warmth, to tell stories, to look beyond mere survival and into meaning. The Ice Age didn't just test their bodies. It awakened their imagination. The cold forced them to think, to plan, to create. It demanded evolution not only of flesh, but of thought. When the wind tore through their camps, they built walls. When food ran scarce, they hunted smarter. When fear grew heavy, they leaned on one another. Their resilience became their greatest weapon. This was how a fragile species endured an endless winter. Not through strength, but through connection. Not through dominance, but through cooperation. The fire crackled. The snow whispered. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, and a human answered, not in sound, but in spirit. For though the Ice Age belonged to the cold, the night belonged to them. Beneath the frozen sky, these early humans were not yet masters of the earth, but they were the keepers of its flame. Every ember they guarded was a promise that life would continue, no matter how endless the winter seemed. And as we look back tens of thousands of years later, it is impossible not to feel that same spark, the defiance that once flickered inside the caves of our ancestors. They faced a world that wanted them gone, and yet they remained. The cold claimed countless lives, but not humanity's hope. The Ice Age would pass, the glaciers would melt, and the earth would thaw, but the memory of that endless winter would remain forever etched into the human soul. Because it was there, in that frozen darkness, that humanity learned its greatest truth. Warmth is not just found in fire, but in one another. 12,000 years before history began, the Earth was a different planet. Vast walls of ice carved across continents, grinding mountains to dust and burying entire valleys under shimmering glaciers. The air itself was sharper, thinner, filled with the taste of cold metal. Winters lasted not for months, but for generations, and summers were only pale pauses before the next descent into frost. This was the Ice Age, a slow, relentless sculptor of both land and life. The climate was not kind. It was a master of extremes. Great herds of mammoths and steppe bison wandered across plains of frozen grass, chased by packs of dire wolves and saber-toothed predators. The seas were lower, locked away in the polar caps, exposing land bridges that would one day shape human destiny. To the north, Europe and Asia were bound by glaciers. To the south, deserts lay brittle and dry. The Earth's balance tilted, and humanity, still young, stood small beneath the shadow of this colossal cold. Our ancestors lived on the edge of that frostbitten world, part of it, yet struggling against it. They did not have houses or cities, only fleeting camps marked by smoke and footprints. Their homes were not built for permanence, for nothing in this age was permanent. Every step, every fire, every breath was a negotiation with the elements. They adapted their lives to a rhythm of hunger and endurance, moving with the migrations of animals, always chasing survival. The Ice Age did not happen overnight. It was the result of shifting winds, changing ocean currents, and the subtle tilt of the planet's axis. Over thousands of years, the Earth cooled, and glaciers advanced like armies. Forests withered, grasslands spread, and entire species vanished beneath the weight of snow. But as the cold grew stronger, so did human resilience. It was this slow, grinding struggle that forced our species to think differently, to become something more than mere scavengers. In this frozen world, evolution was not a theory, it was an act of daily life. Bodies grew hardier, minds sharper. Those who could read the sky, track the wind, and sense the coming storm survived. Those who could not became part of the snow. The cold was an unrelenting teacher, stripping away weakness and rewarding only those who could adapt. Fire became sacred, tools became extensions of thought, and community became a shield against extinction. The Ice Age shaped not just landscapes, but destinies. Glaciers carved deep valleys that would one day cradle rivers and civilizations. The pressure of scarcity forged cooperation among early tribes. Language evolved, not from comfort, but from necessity, a way to warn, to teach, to plan. In the silence of frozen nights, human beings learned to share stories, to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. Those stories, whispered beside dwindling fires, became the first sparks of culture. Amid this frozen vastness, the contrast between life and death was constant. To survive even one winter required skill, intuition, and courage. Every hunt could end in triumph or tragedy. Every journey carried the risk of being swallowed by a blizzard. But despite this, humans continued to move, to create, to build fragile warmth in a world made of ice. The very existence of their footprints on glacier edges was an act of defiance, a mark saying, "We were here." It was during this time that the first great migrations began. As glaciers locked parts of the world in ice, others opened pathways never seen before. Bands of hunters crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas, while others followed the herds across Europe and Asia. The planet was changing, and humans followed its pulse. The Ice Age, though cruel, gave humanity the world. And so, through wind and silence, through hunger and storm, the human story deepened. The Ice Age tested every breath, but in that test, it revealed something eternal, a species that refused to yield. The ice would recede one day, but the lessons it carved into the human spirit would never melt away. The courage born in that age still flickers within us, like an ancient fire that refuses to die. Every sunrise in the Ice Age was not a beginning, it was a test. When the first pale light bled over the frozen horizon, there was no guarantee that those who slept near the fire would live to see the next dusk. The air bit at the skin like invisible teeth, turning breath to frost before it could fade. For the prehistoric human, survival was not counted in years or even seasons. It was measured in moments of warmth, in the fleeting comfort of a steady flame, and in the soft beat of a heart that refused to stop. Each morning began with the ritual of fire. Someone, usually the youngest and most agile, would crawl toward the ashes, blowing gently to see if an ember still glowed beneath the gray dust. If there was even the faintest spark, life continued. If not, panic whispered through the camp. Fire meant safety, cooking, light, and spirit. Without it, the cold crept in like a silent predator, and within hours, everything living would fade to stillness. To keep the flame alive was to keep humanity alive. Once the fire was fed and the first breath of smoke rose into the frozen air, the day's battle began. Food was the next challenge. The Ice Age world offered no gardens, no easy meals. Only what could be hunted, scavenged, or remembered from caches buried weeks before. Men and women worked together, following tracks in the snow, studying the wind, and listening for distant movement. Each sound, the crack of ice, the snort of a reindeer, the echo of a falling branch, could mean life or death. Hunting in such cold required more than courage. It demanded patience, intelligence, and unity. The tribes learned to read the frozen world like a book. They could tell, from the shape of snowdrifts, which way the animals had passed. They could hear danger long before it appeared. Children were taught from their first steps to move quietly, to waste nothing, and to respect the animals they pursued. A kill was never just a victory. It was a sacred exchange. The creature's life became their own, its warmth carried into their blood, its bones and hide transformed into tools, clothing, and shelter. The Ice Age allowed no luxury of cruelty. Even death had purpose. Back at camp, the daily rhythm was one of constant motion. The women tended the hides, softening and shaping them into garments that trapped precious heat. Others gathered dry grass and bark to feed the fires, or fetched water from beneath the ice, breaking through frozen layers with stones. Children learned by watching, by imitating, by failing and trying again. The oldest among them, keepers of memory, told stories while shaping tools from flint or bone. Stories of hunts, of ancestors, of the spirits of the land. These tales were not mere entertainment. They were instructions, lessons wrapped in myth, survival written in sound. As daylight faded, the temperature dropped sharply. Winds howled like voices of ghosts, and the tribe withdrew into the tight circle of their shelter. Here, time seemed to slow. The smell of smoke mixed with animal fat. Shadows danced against stone walls. The fire's crackle became their heartbeat, steady and alive. They ate together, passing food hand to hand, speaking little, conserving both breath and warmth. Every movement was deliberate. Every ember mattered. The cold outside was endless, but within the glow of that fire, there was something stronger, belonging. But even in the safety of warmth, fear remained. They knew the world beyond that circle was merciless. Predators hunted under the moonlight. A sudden blizzard could erase all tracks and starve a tribe within days. And yet, no matter how dangerous, they could not stay still forever. The cold forced migration. Hunger demanded risk. Tomorrow, someone would have to leave the fire again, to follow the herd, to search for wood, to face the ice once more. Still, within that fragile balance, there was a strange peace. The Ice Age had stripped life to its core. No noise, no excess, only survival and spirit. The humans of this time did not live for comfort. They lived for endurance. Each breath they took was a rebellion against extinction, each spark of fire a declaration that they would not vanish into the dark. And so, every day repeated this eternal pattern. Wake, guard the fire, hunt, build, rest, dream. Life was a circle of effort and renewal, simple yet profound. They had no written words, but their actions told the oldest story on Earth, the story of resilience. The Ice Age tested their bodies, but it also shaped their minds, teaching them to find beauty in hardship, meaning in struggle, and unity in fear. The cold was their enemy, but it was also their teacher. It carved them into something greater, creatures of endurance, of imagination, of faith in one another. The daily battle for warmth was not just about survival. It was about identity. They learned that warmth was not only in fire, but in shared breath, shared work, shared hope. And in that lesson, the fragile species standing on the edge of extinction became the future rulers of the world. The cold did not forgive weakness. As the wind howled across the open plains, the difference between life and death often depended on the strength of a wall, the curve of a stone, or the thickness of a hide. Shelter was not simply protection. It was survival shaped by instinct, patience, and memory. Every structure our ancestors built was a silent declaration against the storm, a defiant message to the endless winter that humanity would endure. The first shelters were gifts of nature, dark caves carved by rivers long before humans ever walked the earth. Within these stone wombs, families gathered close, finding refuge from the bitter wind and prowling predators. The flicker of firelight cast their shadows upon the walls, turning them into living art. The caves were not just homes, they were sanctuaries. The stone absorbed warmth, muffled the roar of blizzards, and offered a sense of permanence in a world where everything else could vanish overnight. But the caves also carried mystery. Their walls became the first canvases of humankind, adorned with handprints, hunting scenes, and symbols that whispered of dreams and fears shared by generations huddled beneath the same rock ceiling. Yet not all humans lived near caves. Many wandered across treeless tundra and frozen steppe, with a wind cut like a blade, and there was no shelter to be found. For them, necessity birthed innovation. They built homes for what the land provided: mammoth bones, reindeer hides, branches, and snow. A frame of curved ribs might become the skeleton of a dwelling, covered in thick skins stitched together by sinew and anchored with stones. Inside, the walls breathed faintly with heat from the fire, while the outside froze solid into armor. Snow itself became a tool, packed tight to form barriers that trapped warmth and silenced the wind's scream. These shelters were not grand, but they were marvels of adaptation. The people who built them understood the earth and air as intimately as their own hands. They knew where to face the entrance to block the wind, how high to make the ceiling so smoke could escape without stealing the heat, and how to dig shallow pits inside to store meat away from scavengers. Each camp was temporary, yet each one was built with the care of a home. The cold taught them craftsmanship not for beauty, but for endurance. Inside these shelters, life pulsed quietly. Children learned to crawl on furs softened by countless hands. Elders told stories by the fire, their voices echoing softly off walls of stone or hide. The air smelled of smoke, fat, and wet fur, a scent that meant warmth, safety, and belonging. It was here, in these enclosed spaces, that the tribe was truly alive. Outside lay frost and silence. Inside was heartbeat and breath. The contrast was profound. The world of death beyond the door and the fragile pocket of life within. At night, the shelters became cocoons. Men and women pressed close, bodies sharing heat beneath thick skins. Every flicker of firelight revealed faces softened by exhaustion and trust. The sounds of the storm outside were distant, muffled by the layers of snow and bone. For a few precious hours, they could rest without fear. It was in these moments, between wakefulness and sleep, that imagination began to stir. They dreamed of warmth, of hunts to come, of ancestors watching from the dark. Shelter did not just protect their bodies. It gave their minds space to wander. The materials they used spoke of genius born from scarcity. From mammoth tusks, they carved beams and supports. From animal hides, they fashioned doors and coverings. From mud and grass, they sealed cracks against drafts. They even used animal fat to create primitive lamps, their flames fed by wicks of dried moss. Every detail mattered. Every stone, every knot, every seam held the difference between comfort and collapse. Theirs was an architecture of necessity, and yet it carried the first seeds of human design. The ability to imagine space, to shape environment, to build rather than only inhabit. Even the positioning of these shelters showed intelligence. Camps were built near water sources that did not freeze entirely, or close to hunting routes traced by herds. Shelters faced the low winter sun to catch warmth, and entrances were curved to confuse the wind. These choices were not luck. They were wisdom passed through generations, encoded in practice long before it was ever spoken as rule. The people of the Ice Age may not have known geometry or engineering as we define them, but they understood balance, resistance, and flow. Their homes were poems written in bone and snow. But sometimes, even the strongest shelter failed. When a storm broke with too much fury, when a mammoth herd trampled across the plain, or when a fire burned too low, people were forced to flee, moving together into darkness, searching again for safety. In those moments, the world reminded them of its vastness, of how small a human truly was beneath the endless white. Yet, each time they rebuilt, stronger than before. Every collapse became a lesson. Every new shelter, a story of persistence. Through these acts of building and rebuilding, humanity learned something profound. The meaning of home. Not a place, but a feeling of warmth shared, of breath mingled, of survival earned together. The shelters of the Ice Age were fragile, temporary, and easily forgotten by time. Yet in them, the foundation of civilization was laid. Within their walls of hide and stone, humans discovered cooperation, craftsmanship, and care. As snow drifted silently outside, the fire inside glowed steady and calm, defying the dark. And in that fragile warmth, mankind found its truest invention. Not the spear, not the wheel, but the home. It was there, beneath the hum of the storm and the weight of the cold, that humanity learned the art of creating life against all odds. In a world of endless frost, there was one sacred element that held the power of gods: fire. It was not just light or warmth. It was the very soul of survival. Every spark, every glowing ember was a miracle, wrestled from the hands of nature and guarded with devotion. To the people of the Ice Age, fire was alive. It breathed, it consumed, it gave, and it demanded. Around it, life gathered. Without it, everything faded into cold oblivion. Fire was never taken for granted. It could not be conjured easily. Sometimes days of labor, friction, and patience were needed to coax a single flame from wood or stone. The people learned the ways of flint and pyrite, striking them until sparks leapt like shooting stars in a nest of dried grass and bark. They learned to protect those sparks with cupped hands, whispering over them, breathing life into them until they became flame. It was creation itself, a small act of godhood performed by trembling human hands. Once born, fire had to be fed like a living creature. It demanded fuel, wood, fat, bone, anything that would burn. Children were taught early to gather tinder and twigs, to keep them dry, to never let the flame die. In many tribes, one person carried the sacred duty of the firekeeper. It was their task to watch through the long night, to guard the embers when all others slept, to ensure that when the dawn came, the camp was still alive. If the flame went out, it was not just an inconvenience. It was a catastrophe. To relight it in the heart of a blizzard could take hours or even days, and those hours could claim lives. Fire changed everything. Around it, people gathered to eat, to mend, to talk, to dream. Its circle of light created a boundary between safety and danger, between the human world and the wild. Beyond the firelight, the darkness belonged to predators. The gleam of a wolf's eyes, the silent prowl of a cat. But within its glow, there was comfort and confidence. The fire did not just chase away the cold. It chased away fear. Its light became a symbol of community and order, a fragile island in a sea of darkness. It was near the flames that tools were sharpened, that meat was cooked, that stories were told. Smoke rose to the heavens, carrying with it the smell of survival. To watch fire dance was to witness mystery. It flickered, shifted, whispered in colors. Its beauty held both danger and salvation. One careless moment could burn skin or shelter, yet no one dared live without it. Fire demanded respect. It was the teacher of patience, discipline, and reverence. The fire also changed how humans ate, and in turn, how they lived. Cooking transformed food, releasing more energy, softening meat, and killing hidden dangers. It allowed humans to grow stronger, to think faster. Around the fire, meals were no longer just nourishment. They became ritual. People sat close, sharing what they had hunted, feeling the warmth of both flame and fellowship. In those moments, they were not just surviving. They were becoming something more, creatures capable of gratitude, of reflection, of culture. And yet, fire's power extended beyond the physical. It awakened the imagination. The dancing shadows it cast on cave walls inspired art, myth, and storytelling. The fire became the stage for memory. Elders spoke of spirits that lived within it, guardians, ancestors, or gods who could bless or curse. Sparks that rose into the night sky were believed to carry messages to the unseen world. Children listened, wide-eyed, as the flames reflected in their eyes, burning those stories into their souls. The sound of the fire was the heartbeat of the tribe. It cracked and sighed, spoke in rhythms, comforted and warned. During the darkest storms, when the world outside vanished beneath snow and wind, the fire became the only sign that life persisted. Its glow touched every face, uniting them in a shared circle of warmth. Even the wounded or the weak drew close, for its heat did not discriminate. It gave equally to all who came near. The firekeeper's role was more than practical. It was spiritual. They were chosen not just for skill, but for patience and care. To guard the flame was to guard the tribe's soul. When the people traveled, the keeper carried embers wrapped in bark or animal dung, glowing softly even through wind and snow. These embers were seeds of life, ready to be reborn wherever the next camp was made. Every fire lit from those embers carried a connection to the one before, a chain of flame stretching back through generations. It was continuity, memory, and hope. There were times when the fire raged out of control, consuming huts or trees, reminding the people that the same power that gave life could also take it. But even then, they did not curse it. They rebuilt, they learned, they adapted. They understood that fire was not theirs to own, only theirs to respect. It was the perfect symbol of their place in nature. Small beings wielding great power, always on the edge of balance. When the night grew quiet, when the wind softened and the stars emerged, the people would watch the fire burn lower. One by one, they would sleep, their faces peaceful in its fading glow. Only the fire keeper remained awake, stirring the coals, watching the breath of the earth dance above them. The keeper would sometimes whisper to it, words of thanks, of prayer, of promise. "Stay alive," they would murmur, "and we will stay alive with you." In that fragile connection between flame and flesh, the destiny of humanity was sealed. Fire gave warmth, safety, and light, but also gave something deeper, the sense of control over a wild world. It allowed humans to shape their fate rather than be shaped by it. In the heart of that frozen age, under skies of shifting color, our ancestors learned to command the most ancient magic known to humankind. And in that moment, when the fire burned against the snow and the dark, they ceased to be mere survivors. They became keepers of power, guardians of the flame that would one day light the entire world. The Ice Age was not a season. It was an eternity of cold. For those who walked its endless plains, survival meant more than finding food. It meant building safety against a world determined to freeze them out. Wind screamed through the valleys like a living beast, carrying snow sharp as blades. Nights could kill within hours. In this merciless landscape, shelter was not luxury. It was the thin wall between life and death. The first humans who faced the storm learned quickly that even the strongest fire could not protect them without a home to hold it. The hunt for shelter began with instinct. Caves were the first havens, dark mouths in the side of cliffs that offered warmth, protection, and stillness. They became sacred spaces, wombs of stone where life could pause and breathe. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of smoke, fat, and animal hide. Families huddled close together, using furs to line the cold rock. The cave walls became their canvas. On them, they painted not just animals and hunts, but dreams and spirits. In that flickering light, they turned nature into story, shelter into sanctuary. But caves were rare, and not every tribe was blessed with one. Those without them learned to build. From mammoth bones and thick hides, they created structures that defied the cold. The massive tusks formed arches, covered by layers of fur and earth, creating huts that could trap heat and stand against the wind. It was engineering born of desperation and genius. Bones that once walked the tundra as beasts now stood as walls around human warmth. Every shelter built was a declaration, a whisper of defiance against the cold gods that ruled the Ice Age. Over time, the builders grew wiser. They learned to use snow itself as a shield. Packed tight, it became insulation, reflecting heat inward instead of letting it escape. Early humans might not have called it architecture, but they understood balance and structure better than they knew. Their walls curved to break the wind. Entrances were small to keep heat inside. Even their sleeping spaces were layered carefully, skins below, hides above, and always bodies close together. Warmth shared was warmth multiplied. Inside these shelters, the air glowed with the amber shimmer of fire. Shadows danced across the curved ceilings, and the world outside, cold, dark, and vast, faded into a muffled silence. Here, in these tiny pockets of warmth, humanity found its rhythm. Mothers whispered lullabies. Hunters mended their tools. The wounded healed. The old told stories of suns that once shone brighter. The home was more than a structure. It was memory made solid. Each hide, each bone, each stone carried the story of effort, cooperation, and survival. Building a shelter was never a single person's task. It demanded unity. The men hauled heavy bones and hides, while the women stitched seams tight with sinew, sealing out drafts. Children gathered brush and bark, learning early that every hand mattered. In that cooperation lay the foundation of civilization. To build together was to live together, to depend on one another. The shelter was the physical form of trust, the tribe's heart enclosed in walls of fur and bone. As the Ice Age deepened, migrations became frequent. The tribes carried their world with them: tools, embers, hides, and memory. They knew how to build fast, adapting to whatever the land offered. Some camps were made between fallen rocks, others dug into frozen ground. There were shelters so small only a fire and two bodies could fit, and others large enough to hold dozens. But in every form, they shared one truth. Inside these fragile domes, life pushed back against extinction. The sound inside a winter shelter was unlike anything else, a mix of soft breathing, crackling flames, and the distant roar of the wind outside. Time slowed there. The harshness of survival gave way to small comforts. The warmth of a fur blanket, the smell of smoked meat, the feeling of a child's heartbeat pressed against a parent's chest. These moments stitched humanity together. The cold could steal food, fire, or even hope, but as long as people could build shelter, they could rebuild life. There were dangers even inside. Smoke had to escape through holes cut in the roofs, and too much heat could weaken the hides. Fire could consume what little they had. But risk was constant. Safety was never permanent. Each night, they repaired, adjusted, watched. Every gust of wind was a test. Every snowfall a reminder that nature was watching, waiting for a mistake. The people learned not to fear the storm, but to listen to it, to understand how snow drifts formed, how trees bent, how the earth itself could become ally or enemy. In their craftsmanship, there was artistry. They decorated their shelters with feathers, bones, and carved figures, symbols of animals that gave their lives for food and warmth. Some painted spirals and suns, signs of hope in a season without light. These weren't just shelters, they were temples of survival. In their creation, humanity discovered not only how to endure, but how to belong. And when the time came to leave, to follow the herds, to escape the deep freeze, they dismantled their homes with care. They carried what they could and left behind traces, footprints, ashes, broken bones. To them, the land was never conquered, it was borrowed. The shelters they built were not fortresses against nature, but pacts with it, agreements that said, "Let us live here a while, and we will respect your power." In those small domes glowing in the night, the seed of civilization was sown. The instinct to build, to create warmth and safety, would one day lead to villages, cities, and empires. But it began there, under the howling sky of the Ice Age, when a handful of determined beings learned to turn the bones of beasts into walls and the frozen ground into home. The storm would never stop, but neither would they. And as long as a single spark burned inside a single shelter, humanity's story would go on. In the frozen stillness of the Ice Age, every breath of wind carried a secret, every shadow a possibility. The world was both beautiful and brutal, a vast expanse of white where silence could stretch for miles. Here, the hunt was not sport. It was the only rhythm that kept hearts beating. To hunt was to live, and to fail was to vanish into the cold. The hunters of this world walked a tightrope between hunger and hope, their survival depending on knowledge older than words. Before dawn, they moved silently through the snow, wrapping their bodies in fur and bone, their faces marked with ash to hide the glint of human eyes. The cold bit into their skin, but they had long since learned to ignore it. Every sense was alive, sharpened by hunger and instinct. They followed the faint traces of mammoths, reindeer, and bison, prints pressed deep into the ice, broken twigs, and scat frozen like clues left by the gods. The land offered no mercy, but it did speak to those who knew how to listen. The hunt began with patience. Hours, sometimes days, were spent watching, tracking, and studying the prey. The hunters learned their rhythms, the way herds moved with the wind, the way animals hesitated near rivers, the times when they rested or fled. To the Ice Age human, this was not just observation. It was communion. They saw the animals not as mindless beasts, but as fellow survivors of the same cruel world. To kill one was to honor it, to step into the sacred balance that ruled all life. Weapons were simple, but their design was genius. Spears tipped with sharpened stone, atlatls that hurled projectiles farther and harder than any human arm, and later, crude bows that whispered death from distance. Each tool was crafted with care and respect, shaped by hands that understood the cost of failure. Flint knappers struck stones with precision, creating edges so sharp they could slice through hide like silk. The making of these tools was itself a ritual, each strike of stone against stone a prayer for accuracy and luck. When the time came to strike, the hunters moved like shadows. They worked in groups, using hand signals instead of words. Every movement mattered. One wrong step, one snapped twig, and the prey would vanish into the white distance, leaving them to starve. The cold amplified everything, the crunch of snow, the echo of a heart beating too fast. But they were disciplined. They had learned from generations before them that silence could be the difference between life and death. The moment of the kill was a blur of motion, sound, and breath. Spears flew through the air, finding flesh. The animal roared, stumbled, and fell, its warm blood steaming against the frost. The hunters approached carefully, reverently. There was no triumph in their eyes, only gratitude. They whispered thanks to the fallen creature, touching its side, feeling the heat of its body fade. To them, every kill was a gift, a piece of the earth offering itself so that their children might see another sunrise. Once the hunt ended, the true work began. The carcass was carved with practiced efficiency. Nothing was wasted. Meat was cut and packed into hides. Bones became tools. Sinew turned to thread. Fat was stored as fuel for lamps. Even the animal's hide was tanned and shaped into clothing or shelter covering. Each piece had purpose, and in the rhythm of their knives, there was an understanding. This was the cycle that bound all living things. To take life meant to use it fully. The return to camp was a ceremony of relief. As the hunters approached, dragging their bounty through the snow, the air filled with the sound of laughter and welcome. Fires burned brighter, children ran forward, and the elders murmured blessings. In those moments, the tribe became one body again, united by survival. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, warm fat dripping into the flames, hissing like a song of life reborn. For a brief time, hunger loosened its grip, and the cold outside the camp's circle no longer felt so powerful. But the hunt was never truly over. Each kill reminded them of the cost of existence. The hunters dreamed of the animals they had slain. They saw them in the smoke, in the shapes of clouds, in the flicker of the fire. They painted them on cave walls, not as trophies, but as reminders. Their art told stories of respect and dependence. The bison, the mammoth, the bear, each image said the same thing. You give your life so that we may live. It was not religion in the modern sense, but something deeper, a bond between predator and prey, written in flesh and snow. There were hunts that went wrong, too. Storms could erase tracks, and hunger could drive men to chase too far into lands where no fire could survive. Some hunters never returned. Their spears were found months later, frozen into the ground, their owners claimed by the same ice that preserved their prey. Yet even in death, they were remembered. The tribe spoke their names by the fire, calling them heroes. In a world ruled by frost, the courage to hunt was itself an act of faith. Through the centuries, hunting shaped more than their bodies. It shaped their minds. Cooperation, communication, patience. These were not just survival skills. They were the seeds of civilization. The coordination of the hunt became the foundation of teamwork, of shared purpose. The hunter strategies would one day evolve into the tactics of war, the planning of societies, the leadership of tribes. What began as survival became the blueprint of human unity. The white silence of the Ice Age taught the hunters humility. They were never masters of their world, only participants in its eternal dance. Each hunt was a reminder that life persisted only through balance, that the earth gave and took in equal measure. And as they lay beneath the stars, bellies full, watching the auroras twist across the sky, they must have felt it, the quiet truth that they were part of something vast and fragile. The hunt, brutal as it was, bound them to that truth. For in the end, it was the hunt that kept them human. It gave rhythm to their days, purpose to their strength, and meaning to their mortality. In the white silence of that ancient winter, surrounded by death and ice, they did what only humans could. They found beauty in struggle, honor in necessity, and life in the act of taking it. Food in the Ice Age was more than nourishment. It was the single most defining factor between existence and extinction. Every meal was a victory, a pause in the constant struggle against hunger. In the frozen landscapes where little grew, and even the rivers turned to glass, food was a treasure born of courage, endurance, and knowledge. To eat was to live. To feed one's kin was to conquer the cold itself. But in that age, the act of eating was not simple. It was sacred, practical, and deeply communal. After a successful hunt, the camp transformed. The air that had once been filled with the sting of frost now carried the heavy scent of smoke and roasting meat. Hunters returned with blood on their hands and triumph in their hearts. Around the fire, they laid the body of their prize, mammoth, deer, or bison, its weight proof that the spirits had been kind. Women prepared the fires and sharpened flint knives. The process that followed was both ritual and necessity, a dance between survival and gratitude. Meat was the centerpiece of their diet, but it was treated with reverence. Nothing went to waste. The flesh was sliced in thick slabs, roasted over open flames, or boiled in hides filled with hot stones. Fat dripped onto the fire, sending up sparks that shimmered in the air like fire spirits. The hunters and gatherers had long learned that fat was as vital as meat. It was warmth in edible form, a shield against the cold that crept into their bones. They treasured it, saving every drop, rubbing it into skin to protect against frostbite, burning it in lamps to push back the darkness. Raw food, too, had its place. When the hunger was too great or the fires too weak, they ate from the kill immediately, tasting the raw essence of life. The warmth of the animal's body offered heat to their frozen fingers. It was primal, but it was survival at its purest. For them, food was not about pleasure. It was about continuity, about transferring strength from one being to another. The idea of waste was alien. They believed every part of the animal held purpose, from marrow to sinew, from organ to hide. The organs, rich in nutrients, were shared among the tribe's leaders, elders, and pregnant women. The liver, heart, and brain were considered sacred foods, the essence of the animal's power. Eating them was a communion with its spirit, a way of honoring its life and ensuring its strength lived on in those who ate. This was more than superstition. It was instinctive understanding. These parts carried vital vitamins and energy that the body needed to survive months of endless winter. Their traditions, born from necessity, mirrored what science would later reveal as truth. Gathering also played its role. During the brief summers, when the world thawed enough to reveal hidden greens and berries, women and children scoured the land for roots, seeds, and edible plants. They dried these in the sun, storing them in woven pouches or animal stomachs for the cold months ahead. Every handful of dried berries was a memory of warmth. Every seed a promise of life waiting under the snow. Honey, when found, was liquid gold, rare, sweet, and fiercely guarded. Cooking became an act of transformation. With fire, humans learned to make the inedible nourishing, the dangerous safe. Boiling softened roots, roasting brought out flavors, and smoking preserved meat for months. Some tribes built primitive earth ovens, burying their food under heated stones and ash to trap the warmth and flavor. The result was tender meat infused with the scent of soil and smoke. The first true cuisine of humanity was born in these moments, not from luxury, but from necessity, imagination, and respect for the elements. The feast, when it happened, was more than a meal. It was celebration. It was the heartbeat of the tribe. People gathered in circles, sharing portions with hands still trembling from the hunt. Children were fed first, then the elders, then the hunters. Firelight flickered on faces, and laughter rose like music into the cold night. The feast reminded them that they were not alone, that together they had defied the world's indifference. For a few precious hours, the ice could not touch them. Even in times of abundance, there was always preparation for the next famine. The people dried meat into strips, early jerky, that could last for months. They learned to bury food under snow or pack in ice to preserve it. They smoked fish near riverbanks, hanging them on wooden frames that swayed gently in the wind. The knowledge of preservation was power. It was foresight born of fear. To be prepared was to survive the unforgiving cycle of seasons. But famine came all the same. When the herds migrated and the world turned silent, the people faced hunger that gnawed like a living thing. In those times, they scavenged bones from old kills, cracking them open to suck out marrow. They boiled hides into broth, chewed roots that tasted of bitterness and dirt. Mothers gave their portions to their children, and the fire's light grew smaller each night. Yet even in their hunger, they remembered ritual. They whispered thanks to the spirits of the animals yet unseen, believing their gratitude would summon new life from the snow. The act of eating connected them not only to nature, but to one another. Each shared bite was an unspoken promise. I will keep you alive, and you will do the same for me. The food that passed between them carried more than sustenance. It carried trust. In the harsh silence of the Ice Age, sharing food meant sharing hope. In these small, flickering moments, the warmth of a shared meal, the scent of roasting meat, the laughter that rose above the wind, something extraordinary was born. Humans were no longer just surviving. They were creating culture. Food became language, tradition, and memory. It defined them as a species that could look at the frozen, empty world and still find flavor in it, still make beauty from scarcity. So, when the fire dimmed and the last piece of meat was eaten, they did not despair. They licked their fingers, tasted the salt of survival, and looked to the horizon. They knew that tomorrow would bring hunger again, but they also knew how to answer it, with skill, unity, and faith. For in the Ice Age, eating was never just about staying alive. It was a quiet declaration that humanity, fragile as it was, could still feast beneath the cold stars and call itself victorious. Long before alphabets, before ink, before a single word was written on stone or hide, communication was already shaping the destiny of humankind. In the frozen wilderness of the Ice Age, speech was more than sound. It was survival itself. Every grunt, gesture, and glance carried meaning. Every motion a signal in the eternal dialogue between life and death. For these early humans, language did not yet flow in the structured sentences we know today. It lived in rhythm, breath, and instinct, a raw and powerful bond that allowed them to live as one. The hunt, the fire, the shelter, all demanded unity, and unity demanded understanding. The earliest tribes spoke through the body as much as the mouth. A raised hand meant silence. A nod toward the horizon meant movement. A tap on the arm might mean danger, while a sharp whistle signaled ready. Their world was vast and deadly, and the smallest mistake could mean disaster. They had no luxury for confusion. Language, for them, was a tool sharper than any spear. It evolved not from curiosity, but from necessity, the need to warn, to plan, to comfort. Before speech, sound was emotion. The low hum of reassurance, the hiss of warning, the cry of triumph. Each carried weight and tone that even a child could understand. The difference between life and death might be a single shared sound across a snowfield, a hunter's call to his companions, or a mother's wail for her lost child. Over generations, these sounds became more deliberate, more patterned. From instinct, they built structure. From breath, they built meaning. The first words of humanity were likely simple, names of things seen every day: fire, sky; meat, danger, home. But each syllable carried history. The echo of countless winters survived. Gestures filled the gaps that words could not. Around the firelight, hands moved like stories come alive. The flick of fingers could describe the shape of a mountain or the direction of a herd. Entire hunts were planned in silence. Every motion rehearsed and remembered. It was a language painted in air, understood by those whose lives depended on it. Even the youngest learned early to read the tilt of a head, the shift of an eye. In this wordless communion, there was clarity far beyond sound. When words finally began to form, they grew from emotion, not intellect. The first spoken language was rough and rhythmic, filled with breathy vowels and sharp consonants that cut through the wind. It was music shaped by need. Around the fire, the tribe began to tell stories, not written, but spoken into the night. These stories were memory-made sound. They preserved the hunts, the victories, the losses. They taught the young how to live, what to fear, and what to believe. The storyteller became the keeper of wisdom, the living library of a people without paper. Language also became a bridge between the seen and the unseen. Through it, humans gave names to spirits, to stars, to the invisible forces that ruled their world. A whispered prayer before a hunt, a chant during a storm. These were acts of power, attempts to speak to the unknown. Words, once used for survival, now touched the realm of belief. The more they spoke, the more they imagined, and imagination became the seed of civilization. But language was not just about sound, it was about connection. Around the fire, people began to share not only what they saw, but what they felt. Fear, love, sorrow, hope. These emotions, once locked inside, found release in words and song. A mother could soothe her child with a soft hum. A hunter could warn his tribe of danger miles away with a signal cry. The first lullabies and chants were born not from art, but from instinct, yet they carried something divine, the ability to bind souls together. The more humans communicated, the more they grew as a species. Cooperation became smoother, plans more complex. They could coordinate larger hunts, build stronger shelters, and pass knowledge across generations. A new kind of inheritance emerged, not of blood, but of words. Wisdom could now outlive the body. A child could learn from ancestors they never met, simply by hearing their stories repeated by firelight. In this way, language became humanity's first true tool of immortality. There were times when silence spoke louder than words. During the hunt, stillness was the language of focus. During mourning, it was the language of respect. Early humans understood that communication was not just expression, it was awareness. They listened to the rhythm of wind, the distant call of animals, the shifting of ice. They learned to interpret nature's language too. The crack of ice meant danger. The flight of birds meant change. To survive in such a world, one had to be fluent in more than human speech. One had to converse with the earth itself. And slowly, this growing ability to communicate began to change the human mind. The brain adapted, expanding to hold ideas, memories, and symbols. The act of speaking created thought itself, the ability to imagine, to reason, to plan for tomorrow. Language became the mirror through which humans saw their own reflection. They were no longer creatures reacting to nature. They were thinkers shaping their fate through shared meaning. When night fell and the cold grew deep, the campfire became their stage. Elders spoke softly, their words rising like sparks into the sky. The children listened, eyes wide, learning who they were. These stories, of ancestors of gods of the hunt, were not just tales. They were lessons wrapped in myth, the memory of the tribe preserved through sound. In those moments, humanity found its voice, not only to survive, but to remember. In time, language would give rise to culture, to art, to philosophy. But in that frozen dawn of history, it was simpler and purer. It was the sound of one human reaching another through the void. It was the promise that, no matter how harsh the wind or how endless the night, no one would face the silence alone. Through language, humans tamed not just the land, but the isolation within their own hearts. Words became warmth when fire burned low, hope when food was scarce, prayer when death drew near. And when the first dawn broke over the ice fields, it was the voice of humanity, rough, ancient, and filled with wonder, that rose with it. For it was through communication that humankind learned its greatest truth, that survival is not only a matter of strength, but of understanding, of connection, and of being heard. In the endless cold of prehistoric winters, before cities or kings, before even words were steady upon the tongue, there was only darkness. The nights were long and merciless, stretching over frozen plains where predators prowled and men huddled like shadows. It was in this bleak, merciless world that fire was born, not as a gift from the gods, but as a triumph of human will. Fire was not merely warmth. It was revelation. It was the first true light against the eternal night, the spark that transformed humanity from hunted to hunter, from creature to creator. In the beginning, fire was fear. Early humans saw it in the distance. Lightning striking dry brush, a sudden blaze devouring a forest, molten rivers flowing from the mouth of the earth. It roared and danced beyond control, both beautiful and terrible. The flames devoured everything they touched, and so the first reaction was awe, mixed with terror. But among those who watched from the shadows, there were some who did not run. They saw more than danger. They saw power. They saw the warmth that drove away the cold, the light that turned night to day, and the safety that kept beasts at bay. To capture fire was not easy. The early attempts were desperate and clumsy. Tribes would steal burning branches from lightning-struck trees, carrying them carefully through the wilderness, shielding the ember with leaves and mud. Often the fire would die before reaching camp, leaving only smoke and disappointment. But the lesson was learned. Fire could be tamed, if only for a while. They began to understand its hunger, how it needed air, how it fed on dry wood, how it slept when starved. In time, observation turned into mastery. The discovery of how to make fire from friction, rubbing sticks, or striking stones, was one of the greatest leaps in human history. When the first sparks came to life under human hands, it must have seemed like summoning the sun itself. A flash of orange, a thread of smoke, and then flame. Around it, faces glowed for the first time, no longer hidden in darkness. The warmth spread through their bones, a sensation almost divine after generations of freezing nights. For the first time, humans could decide when light would shine and when it would fade. They had conquered a piece of nature itself. Fire changed everything. With it, nights were no longer filled with terror. The great beasts that stalked the dark, the wolves, the saber-tooths, the bears, now hesitated at the edge of flickering light. The tribe could rest without fear of unseen eyes. They could gather and speak, share food and stories long after the sun had vanished. Around the fire, the first sense of community deepened. The tribe was no longer just a group of survivors. It became a family bound by flame. Cooking was the next miracle. Before fire, food was raw, tough, and dangerous. Meat carried disease, roots were bitter, and plants were hard to chew. But once they placed their catch into the flames, everything changed. The meat softened, the taste deepened, the warmth filled the belly. Cooking made food safer and richer, unlocking energy the body had never known. This small discovery, turning flesh to nourishment, was the foundation of civilization itself. It gave humans strength, clarity, endurance. Around roasted food, laughter replaced hunger, and stories replaced silence. Fire also gave birth to craft. With its heat, they hardened their tools, shaped stones and bones into sharper weapons, baked clay into vessels that held water and grain. Fire became both destroyer and creator, capable of destruction but also of shaping the world. It was the first true tool that extended beyond the body, a symbol of transformation. Humans began to see that they could change nature, not just endure it. And in that moment, the idea of control was born, the seed of every invention that would follow. The spiritual side of fire soon emerged. To those who had lived in endless darkness, this light was not merely a tool, it was a presence. The flame danced like a living spirit, whispering in tongues of orange and gold. It devoured offerings of wood as though it were alive. Some tribes began to revere it, feeding it carefully, protecting it from rain and wind. They built sacred fires that never died, guarded by chosen keepers who ensured the flame was always alive. Fire became a symbol of continuity, the living heart of the tribe. To lose the flame was shame, to keep it burning was pride. Around the campfire, humanity discovered itself. They sat in circles, faces lit by amber glow, shadows flickering against cave walls. It was here that storytelling was born. Elders recounted the great hunts, the spirits of the forest, the heroes of the past. Children listened, their wide eyes reflecting flame and wonder. The fire turned words into ritual, sound into culture. It became the center of memory, the place where wisdom passed from one generation to the next. As time passed, fire became more than survival. It became identity. It separated humankind from all other creatures. Animals could fear it, but only humans could make it. It gave them mastery over time, day and night, cold and warmth, hunger and plenty. The campfire became the first hearth, the first temple, the first beacon of civilization. Even as tribes moved, They carried embers and hollow stones or dried moss, ensuring the flame would never die. Fire became the symbol of life itself, a reminder that warmth could exist even in the coldest world. But fire's gift came with danger. The same force that cooked food and forged tools could also destroy. Whole forests burned, villages vanished in its rage. Early humans learned respect through pain. They discovered balance, nurture the flame, but never let it grow wild. This duality shaped their worldview. Every power came with a price. Every gift demanded care. From this lesson, the roots of morality and responsibility began to grow. In the glow of firelight, humans found courage to explore further, to step beyond the limits of fear. With torches, they ventured into the depths of caves, illuminating ancient walls where they painted their lives in ochre and ash. Those cave paintings of hunts, spirits, and dreams were reflections of fire's gift, the power to create meaning from darkness. The torch guided their hands as they drew the first art of humanity, marking the dawn of imagination. When dawn broke over the Ice Age plains, smoke rose above human camps like banners of triumph. The beasts still roamed, the storms still howled, but mankind now had its own sun, small, fragile, but eternal. The fire's light became the promise that no night would last forever, that even in the coldest shadow, there would always be warmth, memory, and hope. It was not just survival, it was rebirth. Through fire, humans became something new. No longer bound by nature's mercy, they became its shapers, its interpreters. The spark that once came from lightning now lived in their hands. And in that glow, flickering across the faces of early humanity, the story of civilization began, not written on stone, but glowing in flame. For prehistoric humans, the seasons were not measured by calendars or clocks, but by instinct, observation, and dream. The world spoke to them in subtle signs: the length of shadows, the migration of animals, the whisper of the wind through frozen trees. Winters were not sudden. They arrived as a slow warning. Cavemen learned to read these signs, for survival demanded foresight. Winter was both a challenge and a teacher. To live through it, they had to understand it, not as a passive force, but as a living presence that could be interpreted and respected. The knowledge of seasons was passed down through generations. Elders became living libraries, their memories etched in years of hunting and survival. They taught the young how to recognize the subtle shift in daylight, the way snow changed underfoot, the calls of birds migrating south. These were not trivial lessons. They were survival maps written in memory. To know when the herds would move, when the rivers would freeze, or when a storm was coming was the difference between life and death. Their knowledge was instinct shaped into wisdom, an oral science rooted in observation. Dreams also became part of this seasonal knowledge. Cavemen believed dreams were messages, visions that carried warnings or guidance from the spirit world. Before winter, some would sleep near the fire, seeking dreams that spoke of the coming cold. Shamans and elders interpreted these visions, connecting them to patterns in nature. A dream of flowing water might mean a thaw. A dream of a great hunt could mean a plentiful winter. This was not superstition. It was an early form of environmental awareness, a way to interpret nature's language when survival depended on it. The arrival of winter was marked by rituals. As the days shortened and frost began to cling to the ground, tribes gathered to prepare. Hunting parties brought back the last herds of the season. Roots and berries were collected and stored. Hides were treated and stacked for warmth. Fires burned brighter and longer. Around these preparations grew traditions, songs, dances, and ceremonies that bound the tribe together. The rituals were both practical and spiritual, ensuring not just survival, but unity in the face of hardship. Hunting patterns shifted with the seasons. In the warmth of summer, animals were plentiful and dispersed. Winter required strategy and patience. Hunters tracked smaller herds, learned to follow the frozen scent trails, and used the wind to their advantage. They understood the landscape as a living map, reading snowdrifts and ice to locate prey. Every step was calculated. Every movement was planned. Winter hunts were not only tests of strength. They were lessons in endurance and cooperation. Gathering also adapted to the rhythms of the cold. As frost hardened the earth, plant life became scarce. Women and children foraged for the last edible roots, stored seeds, and collected driftwood and moss for fire. This seasonal work was vital. It was the preparation that sustained the tribe through months of scarcity. Gathering became a shared responsibility, a rhythm that knit the group together. Each root dug, each bundle of moss carried was a thread in the fabric of survival. In the deep freeze, the mind sharpened. Winter demanded not just physical endurance, but mental clarity. The long nights by the fire became times of storytelling and planning. Elders told tales of winters past, of hunts that brought life and those that brought death. These stories were not merely entertainment. They were instruction manuals. They encoded survival strategies in vivid narratives. The tribe learned to see the future through the past. Dreams and stories together formed a guide for living with the seasons. Seasonal knowledge extended beyond hunting and gathering. It shaped their worldview. Cavemen saw themselves as part of a larger cycle. Winter was not just a time of hardship. It was a part of life's rhythm. They respected it, preparing offerings to the spirits of snow and wind, believing that harmony with nature ensured their survival. This was the origin of ritual and religion. In the cold, they discovered humility. They learned to anticipate change and accept it. Winter became a teacher, and those who listened learned not only to survive, but to endure. The sharing of seasonal wisdom became a sacred act. Around the fire, knowledge was passed orally, stories of where to hunt, how to build shelters, when to migrate. This was the tribe's living history. Every elder was a keeper of this knowledge, every child a future guardian of survival. The wisdom of the seasons was more valuable than any weapon. It was the map that guided the tribe through the long night. Without it, survival was a gamble in the teeth of winter. Even in the darkest months, there was hope. Dreams and traditions carried the promise of spring. The turning of the seasons was part of their belief system. Winter was temporary, a passage that must be endured. This understanding gave them resilience. They did not fight winter in defiance. They prepared for it, learned from it, and lived within its cycle. In this way, they turned hardship into knowledge, instinct into wisdom, and survival into a tradition that would be passed down for generations. By learning to read the seasons, cavemen turned the cold from an enemy into a guide. They saw patterns in frost and snow, understanding the language of the land without words. This knowledge became part of their identity. To live in winter was not simply to survive. It was to understand, to adapt, and to weave one's life into the eternal rhythm of the earth. In their dreams, in their rituals, in their stories by the fire, the people of the Ice Age passed on a truth as old as time. Survival was not just about strength, it was about wisdom. For Ice Age humans, the difference between life and death often rested in their tools. In a world carved of ice and stone, where the wind howled like a predator and the nights could last for months, tools were more than instruments. They were extensions of the body, a bridge between human will and nature's demands. Every spear, every scraper, every bone needle was forged from necessity, honed by generations of trial and survival. These tools were not born of convenience, but of desperation and ingenuity, the earliest technology humanity ever created. The making of tools was a ritual in itself. Flint, bone, and antler became the materials of survival. Cavemen learned to break stone with precision, shaping it into points sharp enough to pierce flesh and hide. Each strike of flint against flint was deliberate, producing sparks of fire as well as weapons of life. The process required patience and skill, and those who mastered it became indispensable to their tribes. A skilled toolmaker was not merely a craftsman. They were a keeper of survival, a creator whose hands carried the knowledge of generations. Spears were among the earliest and most vital weapons. They were simple in design, but deadly in use. Long shafts of wood tipped with sharpened flint could bring down prey many times larger than a human. Hunters perfected techniques of thrusting, throwing, and crafting the spear to match the size and habits of their quarry. In some tribes, the spear became a symbol of identity and power, passed from hunter to apprentice as a rite of passage. It was not just a weapon, it was a testament to knowledge, skill, and survival. Scrapers and knives were equally essential. They transformed the hunt into nourishment and protection. With sharp stone tools, hides could be cleaned, meat sliced, and bones carved into implements. Scrapers became the quiet heroes of survival, turning raw skins into garments and shelters. This craft transformed the harsh hides of animals into warm clothing, insulating humans against the cold. Every cut, every shave of stone was a lesson in utility and respect. Nothing of the animal was wasted. These tools were the threads that stitched survival together. Bone tools carried their own power. Antlers became awls for piercing hides, ribs turned into digging sticks for roots, and jawbones shaped into scrapers. Bones were more than raw material. They carried meaning. They embodied the life of the animal that had been taken, connecting the human hand to the body of the beast. Bone tools represented both survival and remembrance, a way to honor what had been given. The making of bone implements was itself a form of silent prayer, a conversation between human and animal. Tool-making shaped not only survival but also culture. The techniques for crafting tools were passed orally, often accompanied by stories and rituals. Children learned by watching elders, imitating gestures until skill became instinct. This transmission of knowledge created continuity, allowing tribes to build on centuries of experience. Each generation added to the craft, improving tools and refining methods. Tools became part of the tribe's heritage, carrying the wisdom of ancestors into the future. Tools also changed the way humans interacted with the world. With sharpened points and cutting edges, they could hunt more efficiently, build sturdier shelters, and prepare food in ways previously impossible. Tools expanded the reach of human ability, transforming them from passive survivors into active shapers of their environment. They became not only instruments of survival, but of transformation, turning the raw wilderness into a lived-in world. The making of tools required foresight. Hunters prepared for winter long before the frost arrived, fashioning extra spearheads, scrapers, and awls. They stored them carefully, knowing that every blade could mean another day of warmth or another meal. This foresight was the first sign of planning for the future, a key step in human evolution. The tribe that mastered tool-making mastered time itself. Tools also shaped social structure. The toolmakers gained status, becoming central figures in the tribe. Hunting strategies were often organized around the tools available, and those who controlled the knowledge of crafting held influence. Tool-making became a shared skill, but also a source of identity. The shape of a blade, the pattern of a spearhead, became a signature of a tribe, a mark of who they were and where they belonged. In the long winters, when the cold drove humans together around the fire, tools became more than objects. They became symbols of survival. Every spearhead, scraper, and needle told a story of preparation, of patience, of endurance. They were physical proof of humanity's ability to adapt, to transform the harsh world into one of possibility. In the bone and stone of the Ice Age, humans etched their future. The legacy of these tools would outlive the glaciers and the beasts they hunted. They were the foundation of every invention that followed. From stone to bronze to steel, every tool humanity ever created carries the echo of those first sharp strikes of flint. They are a testament to the truth that survival is not given, it is made. And in the quiet crafting of stone and bone, the first chapter of human technology was written. For cavemen living in the brutal cold of the Ice Age, shelter was survival. The winter was a relentless force, bringing winds that cut like blades and temperatures that could freeze breath before it left the mouth. A safe place to rest was not a luxury. It was the difference between life and death. Shelter became humanity's fortress, its womb, its refuge. The architecture of survival was born from necessity, shaped by instinct, skill, and an intimate knowledge of the land. These were not merely structures of stone and hide. They were living spaces woven from the will to endure. The earliest shelters were simple, made from whatever the earth offered. Caves, when available, became natural homes, providing insulation and protection from predators. But caves were rare and often contested, forcing tribes to adapt. They built shelters from bones, hides, branches, and stones, crafting homes that could withstand the bitterest storms. Mammoth bones, in particular, became invaluable, large enough to form frames for huts, strong enough to hold heavy skins as walls. These bone huts were marvels of prehistoric engineering, proof of ingenuity under pressure. Building a shelter was a communal act. It required the cooperation of hunters, gatherers, and toolmakers. Bones were hauled from the kill site, hides were prepared, and stones were shaped into supports. Each task was essential, each member of the tribe contributing to the whole. The process was both practical and ritualistic, a dance of shared labor that bound the tribe together. Shelter was not just a structure. It was a testament to cooperation, trust, and survival. Shelters were designed with the seasons in mind. Winter huts were insulated with layers of hides, moss, and snow. The ground was covered with animal skins for warmth, and openings were kept small to trap heat. Fire was placed strategically inside, its warmth radiating through the walls, its smoke vented carefully to avoid suffocation. These designs were not random. They were born of generations of trial, error, and careful observation. Every shelter was a lesson in living with the cold, a physical expression of seasonal knowledge. The process of building shelter carried symbolic meaning. For many tribes, the hut was more than a home. It was a sanctuary. It was where families gathered, where children were born, where the dead were remembered. The construction of shelter was an act of preservation, not only of life, but of memory. Each shelter carried the imprint of its builders, a mark of identity in the frozen wilderness. Living spaces became part of the cultural fabric, each design a signature of a tribe's history and survival strategy. The choice of location was equally important. Shelters were often placed near resources, water, game trails, or sheltering cliffs. They were positioned to take advantage of sunlight and protection from wind. These decisions were guided by generations of knowledge passed down orally. The location of a home was a statement of understanding the land, a survival strategy as vital as any weapon. A well-chosen site meant warmth, safety, and abundance. A poor choice could mean hardship or death. In the depths of winter, the shelter became a refuge not only from cold but from fear. Outside, the storms roared, but inside there was warmth, light, and safety. The structure became a sacred space, a place for rest and renewal. Around the hearth, the tribe came together, sharing warmth, food, and stories. It was the heart of life in the cold, a place where survival became community. Shelters also reflected innovation. Over time, designs grew more sophisticated. Some shelters incorporated multiple chambers, separate spaces for sleeping, cooking, and storing food. Others used insulation techniques that anticipated modern architecture, layering hides and moss to create breathable warmth. These innovations were born of necessity, but they also reflected curiosity and creativity. Shelter making was an art as well as a science, a continuous experiment in mastering the cold. The importance of shelter went beyond survival. It shaped culture. The walls of shelters became spaces for art, storytelling, and ritual. Cave paintings and carvings often adorned living spaces, transforming them into places of memory and belief. The shelter became a stage for human life, a place where daily survival intertwined with the sacred. It was here that traditions took shape, where culture was born. Even in the harshest winters, shelter was the anchor of human endurance. It was a space where life could be sustained, where plans for tomorrow could be made, and where hope could endure. The winter hut was not simply a dwelling. It was a symbol of humanity's ability to adapt, to protect, and to thrive. In the bones and hides of the Ice Age, humanity built more than shelter. They built a home for survival itself, a testament to their ingenuity, cooperation, and spirit. In the harsh silence of Ice Age winters, survival was never an individual matter. It was a collective endeavor. Family and kinship were the foundation of life, the force that bound people together against the cold. In a world where storms could last for days, where hunger could strip the body of strength, the tribe was both shelter and lifeline. Bonds were forged in frost and fire, in shared hunts and shared hardships. Family was survival writ large, a living circle that sustained both body and spirit through the long winter nights. Life in the Ice Age was organized around the needs of the group. Tribes were extended families, made up of several generations living and working together. Each member had a role: hunters, gatherers, toolmakers, caretakers. Yet survival depended on their cooperation. Every success, every meal, every shelter was the result of collective effort. In this environment, kinship was not a choice but a necessity. The survival of one depended entirely on the survival of all. The family was the first school of survival. Children learned by observation and imitation, absorbing skills and knowledge without formal instruction. They watched elders track animals, prepare food, craft tools, and build shelters. They listened to the stories told by firelight, stories that carried the wisdom of generations. Every tale was a lesson in endurance, every gesture a code of survival. From an early age, children learned that survival was not about individual strength, but about belonging and contributing to the group. Care for one another was instinctive. Elders were revered for their knowledge and experience, even as age weakened their bodies. They were keepers of memory, advisors in strategy, and guardians of tradition. Women cared for children, prepared hides, and preserved food. Men hunted, built, and defended the tribe. But these roles were not rigid. Adaptation was survival. In times of extreme need, everyone contributed to every task. Kinship was flexible, defined by necessity rather than custom. The bond of kinship extended beyond bloodlines. Tribes often incorporated outsiders, strangers who offered skills, knowledge, or alliances. These newcomers became part of the circle, their survival tied to the groups. Inclusion strengthened the tribe, increasing its ability to endure the harsh seasons. This was not generosity alone, it was survival strategy. Kinship was a living network built not only of family ties but of shared dependence. Winter tested these bonds like no other season. The scarcity of food, the length of the nights, and the cruelty of storms demanded unity. The tribe moved together, hunted together, and sheltered together. Every decision was weighed against the needs of the group. The act of sharing was survival. Meat from a hunt was divided according to need, warmth was offered to those most vulnerable, and shelter was shared without question. This was the unspoken law of kinship, the understanding that survival was shared or not at all. Winter also deepened intimacy. In the long hours by the fire, families drew closer. They told stories, sang songs, and exchanged dreams. Children curled against the warmth of their parents, learning the rhythms of life in the cold. The firelight became a shared space of comfort and belonging, where fear was quieted by closeness. These moments of intimacy were as vital as warmth itself. They were nourishment for the soul. Rituals reinforced kinship. Winter ceremonies often involved feasts, chants, and offerings to spirits. These rituals honored ancestors, celebrated survival, and renewed bonds. They transformed survival into shared meaning. Kinship became not only a matter of blood, but a shared culture, a living tradition passed from one generation to the next. These traditions gave structure to survival, embedding it in a framework of identity and belonging. Even the harshest winters were softened by the strength of the tribe. The family was a shield against despair, a bulwark of hope in the face of scarcity. The knowledge that one was not alone, that warmth and food would be shared, transformed hardship into endurance. In the Ice Age, survival was not a solitary struggle. It was a circle of giving and receiving, a shared covenant written in the language of kinship. The circle of life was sustained by trust. Each member of the tribe relied on others, and each gave in return. This reciprocity was the foundation of survival. It was the quiet promise that, in the cold and dark, no one would be abandoned. Family was not just a social structure. It was the first strategy of survival. It was both shield and flame, the human heart's answer to the cold. Through kinship, the harsh world of winter became a place of connection. The fire was warmer, the food sweeter, and the night less frightening when shared. The bonds of family gave strength beyond flesh and bone. They gave meaning to survival itself. In the Ice Age, kinship was not simply about living through winter, it was about creating life in winter. It was humanity's most enduring tool, the circle that held them together against the cold. For prehistoric humans, winter was more than a season. It was a test, a teacher, and a force that shaped the soul. In the long months of frost and darkness, survival depended not only on strength, tools, and food, but also on the spirit. Cavemen developed rituals to honor the cycles of nature, to protect the tribe, and to find meaning in hardship. These rituals bound them together, transforming the struggle of survival into a shared purpose. They became ceremonies of endurance, weaving life, belief, and survival into a single living tradition. Rituals began as instinct and grew into tradition. Before the first snows, tribes would gather to prepare, not only supplies, but themselves. Fires were lit in ceremonies, feasts held to honor the hunt, and offerings placed at the entrances of shelters. These acts were a way of acknowledging the power of winter, recognizing both its danger and its gift. Rituals became a language of survival, a way to align the tribe with the world around them. They were the human answer to the mystery of the seasons. Many rituals revolved around the hearth, the heart of life in the cold. The fire became sacred, a living spirit that demanded care and respect. Before each hunt, hunters might circle the flame, offering a gesture or sound to honor its warmth. Women tended the fire with songs and chants, ensuring the flame stayed alive through the long nights. The hearth was not only a source of warmth. It was a place of connection, where the tribe reaffirmed its unity and its dependence on both each other and nature. Rituals were also tied to dreams. In winter, when sleep was long and deep, dreams were believed to carry messages from the spirit world. Shamans and elders interpreted these visions, linking them to the fortunes of the tribe. Dreams of hunts might inspire strategies. Dreams of storms might guide preparation. These practices formed an early form of spiritual science, a way to interpret the unknown through ceremony and shared belief. In this way, ritual became a compass, guiding the tribe through the uncertainty of the cold. Winter ceremonies often marked transitions, celebrations of survival, and rites of passage. Coming-of-age rituals took place in the deep winter when a young hunter first brought back game, or a child took their first steps into responsibility. These moments were marked with symbolic acts, gifts of crafted tools, offerings of meat, or dances around the fire. Rituals turned survival into a story, a shared memory that strengthened the tribe's identity. They gave structure to life in a season defined by endurance. Music and song became part of winter rituals. The long nights were filled with the hum of chants, the beat of drums, and the murmur of voices. Songs told of hunts and heroes, of storms weathered and ancestors honored. They became a form of oral history, binding the past to the present. The rhythm of song gave comfort and unity, carrying the tribe through the darkness with a shared heartbeat. Music became a bridge between survival and meaning, turning hardship into a shared cultural experience. Rituals also served as teaching tools. Through dance, song, and ceremony, knowledge was passed to the next generation. Children learned the signs of approaching storms, the strategies for winter hunting, and the customs that bound the tribe together. Ritual was living education, an immersive experience that blended survival skills with cultural memory. Every chant, every gesture, every shared meal was a lesson woven into tradition. Spiritual beliefs grew from ritual. Cavemen saw winter as the domain of powerful forces, spirits of cold, wind, and snow. Rituals were offerings to these forces, acts of respect and negotiation. They believed that honoring these spirits ensured protection and provision. In this way, ritual was both survival strategy and prayer. It connected the tribe to the unseen, giving purpose to endurance and hope to the long night. The act of ritual strengthened the tribe's resilience. It gave meaning to suffering and framed survival as part of a greater cycle. Winter was no longer just a season to endure, it was a season to honor, to learn from, to celebrate. Through ritual, hardship became part of the tribe's story, a chapter in the living tradition that would pass from one generation to the next. Even in the deepest cold, rituals kept the tribe together. They were the bonds that transcended hunger, frost, and fear. Around the fire, under the weight of snow, the tribe stood united, not merely to survive, but to live with purpose. Ritual transformed survival into culture. It turned winter into a sacred journey. Through their rituals, cavemen transformed the harshness of winter into a living tradition. They created meaning in the midst of struggle, finding in frost and shadow a shared story. In this way, survival was not merely a physical act, it was a spiritual one. Winter became more than a test of endurance. It became a season of identity, a time when the tribe became a people bound together by shared ritual, shared wisdom, and the enduring warmth of the human spirit. As the Ice Age pressed on, survival became not just about enduring the present, but about imagining the future. For prehistoric humans, the cold was not permanent. It was a cycle. The deep freeze would one day pass, and with it would come changes in the land, the herds, and the patterns of life. To survive meant preparing for that shift, to move when the land could no longer sustain them, to carry with them the lessons of winter into new worlds. Migration became a final act of adaptation, a journey of survival that would shape the destiny of humankind. Migration was born of necessity. As ice sheets advanced and resources dwindled, tribes faced the choice: adapt in place or seek life elsewhere. For many, survival meant moving toward warmer lands, following the rhythm of the herds. These journeys were perilous, across frozen plains, over mountains, through forests both strange and dangerous. But migration was also an opportunity, a chance to discover new lands, new resources, and new ways of living. It was survival as exploration, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. The planning of migration was a communal decision. Elders guided the choice of direction, hunters scouted ahead, and the tribe prepared for the journey. Families gathered what they could carry: tools, food, hides, and knowledge. The path was not random. It was mapped by instinct, experience, and memory. They followed rivers, tracked animal migrations, and moved toward seasons of abundance. Migration was survival transformed into movement, a journey that required trust, skill, and unity. The journey itself was a test. Harsh weather, unfamiliar terrain, and scarcity of food turned migration into a struggle against both nature and time. Every step was calculated. Every decision was survival. The tribe traveled together, sharing burdens and protecting the weakest. The journey demanded cooperation as never before. It was a living lesson in endurance, teaching that survival was not about strength alone, but about unity, foresight, and sacrifice. Migration also carried knowledge. As tribes moved, they brought with them the wisdom of winter survival, the skills of tool-making, fire building, shelter construction, and seasonal reading. They carried rituals, stories, and traditions, embedding them in the new places they inhabited. Every journey became a story, every camp a living memory. Migration was not merely movement. It was the transmission of culture, a way of preserving the past while forging the future. The legacy of winter survival shaped the way humanity moved through the world. Knowledge of the seasons, shelter, tools, and kinship became essential parts of migration. Tribes adapted to new climates, learned new hunting strategies, and developed new shelters. Winter had taught them endurance, observation, and preparation. These lessons became part of their legacy, passed down through generations, carried like embers through the long night. Migration was also a story of transformation. In leaving their frozen homelands, humans adapted not only their survival skills, but their identity. They learned to read new landscapes, to hunt unfamiliar game, and to craft tools suited to new environments. Every migration was a chapter in human history, a movement that reshaped culture, language, and survival strategies. It was evolution in motion, driven by the need to endure. Even in movement, the traditions of winter survived. Tribes carried with them rituals that honored the cycles of nature and the hardships endured. Fires were lit at each new camp. Songs were sung to call forth protection, and offerings were made to the spirits of the journey. These rituals preserved continuity, connecting past survival with present challenges. They turned migration into a sacred passage, a continuation of the cycle of life. Migration forged connections between tribes. Paths crossed, and tribes exchanged knowledge, tools, and stories. This exchange strengthened survival. It created networks of kinship that transcended geography. The movement of people became the movement of ideas, forging bonds that would echo through generations. Migration was not simply about escaping winter. It was about creating a shared future. The legacy of migration lies in humanity itself. Every journey carried the story of endurance, adaptation, and cooperation. These were the lessons of the Ice Age, written into the DNA of survival. Migration became a defining force in human history, a testament to the ability to endure, to adapt, and to carry knowledge forward. It was the continuation of the great experiment of life. Beyond the ice lay new worlds, but within every step of the journey lay the memory of winter. The knowledge of shelter, fire, kinship, tools, and ritual was carried into every new land, becoming the foundation of human culture. Winter had taught humanity not only how to survive, but how to carry survival into the unknown. Migration was the living proof that survival was not an end, but a beginning, a journey into the future. Through migration, humanity transformed survival into legacy. The winters of the past became the story of endurance for the future. In the endless journey of humankind, the lessons of the Ice Age remain alive. The struggle against cold and darkness became more than a challenge. It became the birth of a shared human story, one of courage, wisdom, and the relentless will to move forward.